Hello and good evening. Today I have three guests, namely Rainer Hahnekamp, who will talk about RX7 in Angular. He will
Hello,
also
everybody.
a big overview of the share operator. Hi, Rainer.
Hello, Manfred, and hello to everybody else who is listening and watching. Hi.
We have Michael Eckert-Zikes, who will talk about web component routing or routing for micro frontends in general. Hi, Michael.
Hi, hello to every one of you, and yeah, let's have a nice meetup all together. Thanks.
And we will have someone who is speaking English in a very proper way because he lives there. So it is really cool stuff. It's Duncan who will talk about material, Angular material. Hi, Duncan.
Hi, everybody.
Awesome. So I would say let's get started with Rainer, who will talk about, as mentioned, RxJS 7 and the new share operator in the context of Angular. So let's get started.
Okay. Thank you, Manfred. Hello from my side again. Let me quickly share my screen. So there it is. And I hope everybody can see my slides.
Perfectly.
Wonderful. So for the introduction, as Manfred already said, my name is Rainer. I am a trainer and consultant at Angular Architects. And yeah, that's it more or less. I mean, we have some slides afterwards where we can introduce Angular Architects a little bit further. But I just want to go ahead and introduce the agenda for this talk. So this is more or less about the changes in RxJS 7, and we mainly focus on the share operator. Nevertheless, we will start with noteworthy changes. So this is not just the share operator, but also other things. This is the promise, the to promise, the deprecation of it, an additional feature with combine latest, and something also that we have to be aware of when we're using import. And then we come to the share and to the share config. This will be the major part of this talk. Now let's quickly go over these three minor things. We had, for quite some time, we had this method to promise. So what we always could do is that we just set to promise against an observable, and we have received an promise. Now the point is that they were, or the RxJS team, they were not really happy with that approach because there were some problems with it. The first one was that a promise, in contrast to an observable, always needs to return a value. So if an observable is there, it is possible, although not very likely, that an observable is not returning anything. A promise always have to return something, and there was a little bit of a dilemma. Until now, a to promise returns an undefined if there is no value, and that's not really technically correct. The other thing was that a promise always took by default the latest value of the observable, but under the condition that the observable also completes, because otherwise there is no chance for a promise to know which one is the latest and so on. So this is this was also something which was maybe not quite clear to everybody, and these three things they had to change, or they have introduced new features for that. So first of all, the to promise is now deprecated. It still works, but you shouldn't use it. You see here that we are using an observable which isn't emitting anything, and that's why the to promise at the moment is returning an undefined. With the new version with RxJS 7, we get a new method which is called first value from. And now we are just getting the first value from the observable as a promise. In this case, it is 1. We also have a last value from, but here again, please mind that the observable must complete, and only then will you get the last value. And in addition, when the observable is emitting nothing at all, the first and the last value from, they will emit an error. So these are the changes for the to promise method. Another one has been done for the combine latest. That one got a very handy addition. We see here in the old version that with combine latest, we always had to pass our observable within an array. So it was maybe not always very good because we didn't know in the subscription or in the pipe which in which index was what observable. This was not really handy. And now with the new version, this changes, because now we have the possibility to use an object literal. So we don't need to pass the observables into an array. We can also put it into an object literal, and then it's very easy for us because in the subscribe on the pipe, we can just access these observables by using the keys. That's it. So very handy addition. And then maybe not so good. There is also a change in the imports, or in the way that the dependencies are structured or exposing their functions. Until now, as you might know, all the operators, they have been imported from RxJS/operators. With version 7.2, this changes, and now everything is exposed by RxJS directly. This is not a real problem at the moment, but maybe later we need to change all our imports. And I hope, or maybe it is already the case, to be honest, I don't know that, but I hope that there will be schematics which will doing this correction for us and that we don't have to deal with that anymore. So these are the 3 changes. And now let's come to the actual one, to the share operator. A little bit background information about the talk itself. In the beginning, we just upgraded all our projects to RxJS 7, and we thought, well, maybe we just check or we make some kind of talk as that one that is just presenting all these changes. Now, when I first looked at the changelog documentation, I was just overwhelmed. I thought, oh, there are so many methods. I was not even aware that they exist. And I thought, well, maybe it is better if we just look to the changes from a perspective of an Angular application developer, and that we just focus on the major ones where we think that they are used by the majority. So that's why we are just dealing with very few of them. And during that, it turned out that the share operator was maybe really the major change that we face in RxJS, because now we can do more or less the complete multicasting by just using the share operator, because it also has received an upgrade in its configuration options, and now we can more or less do everything. And then we had the idea that we say, okay, maybe it's best if we just focus on the share operator, and even better, just try to implement it step by step, showing all the configurations value, because once you have seen how the implementation works, I think it's very easy to understand how multicasting works and what the various options mean. And this is exactly what we're going to do now. Here is a slide of Ben Lesh. He's the co-developer of RxJS. And in this presentation, he first showed the changes in RxJS 7. And as you can see here, quite a lot of methods have been removed. The only things that really survived are the share and the connectable operator. Ben also wanted to remove the share replay, but he was totally aware that many applications are using that share replay. And if he is also deprecating that one, he will not make so many friends. Let's put it like that. Okay. So let's start. I have already prepared, maybe not here, but maybe here, a small application. You see here, this is a normal screen. We are showing here destinations to various cities. And if I reload the page, then you see here the number 2, which is telling me how many requests are required to fetch the data. If we take a look into our application, we see that it is actually very small. So what we have here is that inside of our application, we have the holidays component. The holidays component is fetching these city names. In this case, they are called holidays, from the holidays service itself. and is just rendering them in this Met expansion panel. If we take a look at the holiday service, then we see that at the moment we are kind of simulating an HTTP request. So we have here a source where we say this is a new observable. We have a subscriber and we are passing in some static data. Nevertheless, this source gets then piped, and in our pipe we have this tab method which will inform our counter. So this is the number 2 that you saw, that a request has occurred. So this is where this is actually the major elements that you have to be aware of. Now, the thing is, inside of my holidays component, we see here that we have one subscription with the async pipe and another one down below. And this means we have 2 subscriptions, and this means this would end up with 2 HTTP requests. And that's exactly now where the share operator comes in, because the share operator can do multicasting and would reduce the amount of requests to 1. So this is what I'm now going to do. I'm going back to my holidays service. I say here, I want to have the share operator. I need to import it. By the way, you see here the new imports. Everything comes directly from RxJS. And if I go back to my application, maybe reload it, we see that the number of requests has now changed to 1. So that's the usual way how it works. We also have a small animation just to re-explain it. So we have a source on the left side, which is returning us the holidays. In the middle, we have our share operator, and it is not a secret how the share operator is doing the multicasting. It is using a subject internally. Now, the share operator doesn't do anything as long as nobody is requesting data from it. So we need some subscribers to do that. At the moment, nothing really happens, but now the first subscriber makes a subscription via the share. The share says, okay, there is a subscription, somebody needs data, and is starting again a subscription to the source. Then we have the first run where we say, okay, now the connection is completed and everything is set up and ready for the first data. Now it can be the case that another subscriber comes into the game, and he also says, well, I also want to be part of that game, and also subscribes. Not a problem. We see here at the moment that there are still no values that have been emitted by our source. This changes now. The source emits some kind of value. The share operator is subscribing to our source. It is putting that element into its own internal subject. And what the share operator is doing now, that it gives the subscribers a subscription to its subject. And that's all. And we don't have to do anything else, because now we have this multicasting effect where all subscribers get the value that are emitted, and the source only needs to emit it once. What happens with the third subscriber? Well, if that one comes too late, this can also happen. Then it depends. I mean, at this moment, the A has been already emitted, so the third subscriber will not get anything. It needs to wait and needs to hope that some data will occur. In this case, subscriber 3 is lucky. B is emitted. It is stored into the subject, and from there it is just distributed to all the subscribers, and that's it, more or less. So that's how the share operator worked in the past, still is working, if we are leaving the configuration as it is by default. Now we are going to implement that. I think I have already explained it enough. So the key sausage here, or the key secret, is that we have a subject inside of a share operator. Going back to my code. So what we are going to do now is that I say, well, I don't want to use the share. I want to use my share. So I create a new file and I call that my share TS. And well, the operators, they are just normal function. There is nothing really special about them. So everything that I have to do is that I just say I have the export function share, which is a generic function. So I have here a T. And what that function will be doing is that it is returning another function. And this is now by default, so this is the default configuration. And this is now the actual function. And that function is receiving the source. So that function gets the actual source, which can be the HTTP client, for example, or in our case, it's just the mocked version of it. The source is an observable, again, of type T, nothing special. What it needs to return is another observable. And in this case, it says we're just returning the same observable of the same type. Okay. So what I can do now, obviously, is that I just say I want to return the source. Then it would already work. I will also create a console log that we see that it is working. Here I am. And I am replacing my share, maybe I call it also my share and not just share, in the holiday service. So I'm going back and I say, share, go away. I want to use my share. Nothing special will happen right now. I mean, I think this is already clear. We see here that we are getting the data which comes from the source. Unfortunately, since we are just bypassing the source itself, we don't have this multicasting anymore. Nevertheless, we have already implemented our first operator. Now, of course, we want to make it a little bit better. We want to base our my share on the subject, because that's, as I said in the beginning, is key in this case. There is just one single problem. I don't want to start. I mean, what I will have to do, of course, is that I need to subscribe to the source at some time. The question is, do I know when the first subscription takes place? At the moment, I only have the source, but I don't have the information when somebody is subscribing to it. And the only way that I can do, that I can find that out, is that I just return an observable which I have full control. So what I would say is that I just create a new observable, and just in order to make things clear, this is now, I think, the hardest part to understand. If you understand what's going on here and why this is working, you have already understood the rest, because then the configurations values, they will not change anything. It's just an extension of what I'm building right now. The observable gets a subscriber, we know that. So now I know inside of this function, when every time this function is called, somebody has subscribed to it. I can prove that if I just say console log inside observable. And we know that we have two subscriptions. So we have one for the actual panel and another one for the count, for the total count at the bottom of our page. So what we expect is that only once the here I am is displayed. This is because the share method is only called once, of course. And for the two subscriptions that we have, that we get 2 times the inside observable. So if I go back, that's true. We see here I am, inside observable, and we see that the data is missing. Why is the data missing? Well, I've just replaced the source observable by my own, which is not emitting anything at the moment. And this is what I'm going to change now, because now I will say, as soon as somebody starts with a subscription, I will subscribe to the source. I will put the data that the source is emitting into my subject, and then I will just use the subject as a connector to fill in or to pass on the data to my subscribers that I have here. And again, it is very important. This function here is called every time a subscribe method is executed. So if it is 3 times, 4 times, doesn't matter. We have it running multiple times. Okay, and now comes hopefully the easy part, because now I just need to define, I just say I have I call it connector. So the subject that I will create, I call it connector because it just connects the source with all the subscribers that are there. Of course, I also need to pass a generic. And now inside of my subscriber, I have to start with the subscription if it hasn't already happened before. So I'm extracting the code for that into an own function, and I call the function handle potential init. And inside of this function, we require another value that we call connected, which is by default true. So connected means if I have already subscribed to the source and if the connection has already happened. By default, that's not the case. And my handle potential init is checking this in the first place. So it's saying, well, if you are connected, then I don't need to do anything, and I just return. If not, the first thing that I do is that I say set connected to true. Now, since this is the first one, I start. Here's here a small error. I have placed that code into the wrong function. It's placed here because I need to get access to that source, of course, because I'm now subscribing to that source. Again, this is the HTTP client that I'm getting. The source, I say subscribe. And what I will do when a value occurs, well, I just put that value into my connector, which is the subject. Say next. A value comes in, and I say, my dear connector, please, this is next, you have a new value. There you go. The connector receives now the data from our source, and everything that we have to do now is that we have to pass on the connector's data to the subscribers that we have. And that's actually very easy. I'm removing my console logs here so that it gets a little bit less code. And I say here, well, I want to subscribe to my connector. And if my subject or my connector is emitting something, I'm just passing on that value to the subscriber. And I'm calling here also next. Next value. Okay. So we have two. Next one coming the data from the source, and then we just pass it on here to our actual subscribers. And that's it. Not really. I missed the handle potential init. Important. Otherwise, it will not really work. Okay, that should do it. Let's just go back. And we see we have one request and the data is there. So we have already created our share operator with the default configuration. But now there are some things that we have to be aware of. The arrows here, they are there for a reason. So if I click on it, an additional window or space gets opened, and what I want to display there is some data about that holiday. The rendering for that is here inside of my partial. I have already commented it out. And what I also want to do before I'm showing you the screen, I'm switching back to my holiday service and I'm using the original share so that we see how the share really works in this case. Okay, so no real surprise. Now let's click on it. And we see that nothing is there. And the problem is because, as I said before, the third subscriber or the subscribers in this case, they just came too late. The source is not emitting anything anymore. We have the subject. I mean, of course, our subscribers, the Vienna Wien subscriber here is connected already, but since the source is not emitting anything, it doesn't receive anything. And the question here is, how do we want to deal with that? It's very easy. I mean, you have already seen that I'm using a subject. We can use a subject which is containing a cache and which is keeping the data, and this is a replay subject. So if we would switch to a replay subject, so this is now the use case where somebody comes too late, a subscriber comes too late, the data has already been sent through. We would just replace it with a replay subject. In this case, we say the cache size is 1. The A is emitted. Our subscribers, which were there on time, they will get the data. That's fine. And then the latecomer starts with the subscription. But luckily, we are using a replay subject and we are passing it on. We're passing already the cached data on, and the subscriber 3 is also happy. And when the B comes in, of course, it is replaced, and then all of them get the B again. In our case, we don't have a B, we only have the A because we only have one data set. Now the question is, how do we persuade the share operator that it is using the replay subject? And that's where the configuration comes in. Because what I can do, I can override the default configuration by placing a configuration object inside of the method of the share operator itself. And the property or the configuration value to replace the subject that we want to use is the connector. And the connector wants to have a function which is returning some kind of subject. And now we say you will not create a subject, but please start with a replay subject. Maybe I also want to add a new. Yeah. We go now back. We see here that it works. And if I open it, the data is already there because the replay subject is storing the data. And now everybody that comes too late will also receive that data. So very nice. The question, of course, is now, how do we want to implement that in our own share operator? It's not so hard. I just need to replace the share here again. And I say, well, my share is also a normal function. I just need to add a configuration value here on top. So I say, well, you have also a config. And inside of the config, I want to get an object literal. In our case, this is a connector. The connector, what it is doing, it is just a function which is returning some kind of subject of type T. How can we use it? Well, we just need to look where the connector is used or where the subject is created. That's just right there at the beginning. So I just say, well, I don't want to use the new subject, but I use the one that I get from my connector. Method that replaces or that generates me as a connector, a new subject, and it should work. So we have the my share with the connector. Compilation was successful. Let's go back. If I click on it, we see that also my share is now able to deal with a replay subject. Wonderful. Now we are getting a little bit serious because now I'm going back to my holidays service. And as you saw, the way that I'm fetching or that I'm generating the observable, that's not the way what we do in reality, in practice. So what we usually do is that we are just requesting the data from a backend. So we're using an HTTP client for that. And that's also what I'm going to do now. So I say the source is now not an own built observable. It's just using the HTTP client. I call get. The URL is assets holidays JSON. And of course, I also need to set the type here. So I'm getting back an array of holidays. And I'm switching back to my share. So we'll do this for the further two configuration values as well. I will always switch back first to the share operator so that we see how it works with the real one. And then we will re-implement it in the my share one. Let's see what happens. Well, you see the counter. It is incrementing every time that I'm opening, not this one, but every time I'm opening a new card, or I don't expansion panel, how it is called. It is doing an additional request. And we can also see this if we would have our network requests, that the holidays JSON is really requested multiple times. So why does this happen now? I mean, we had it already, and now we have introduced something very strange. And what we haven't considered is the following thing. In the observable that I have written in the beginning, I did only execute, or I only run the command next, but nothing else. What the HTTP client is doing, it says you will get you will get the data from the response, and then you will get nothing else, and I will complete the observable. So the HTTP client is also completing it. And now my share operator behaves a little bit in a different way. Let's go back to the animation. So this is now the use case where we say a subscriber again is coming too late, but it hits a completed source. So what's happening here is the error is emitted. We know already the story. And now the source is emitting the completed event or the complete event. This one is, of course, passed on to our subscribers. They say, okay, nothing will occur anymore. The share says, okay, we are done. You will not get anything anymore. And all over. Now the subscriber wakes up and says, I also want today, I also need the data. But this time, since the share has already resetted itself, so it says, okay, I am closing all my connections. And what we're doing here is that we are just calling a subscribe again against the cold observable, more or less. And the share operator is reinitializing the configuration of the subscription to the actual source. And this means we have another HTTP request as we have just seen. So again, source is connected, the connection is made up. The runs now changes from 1 to 2. The B is emitted, the subscriber gets it. Again, everybody is happy except our backend friends because they have now a lot of HTTP requests which they don't want, maybe. So how can we change that? We have in our share operator this configuration value reset on complete. And by default, it is set to true. So this means when the source is emitting a complete, it's all over, we are resetting. I can change that. I can say, well, I don't want to reset if it is complete. And what will happen then? Once the complete event has been sent to our subscribers, the share still stays active. So we have our subject, the third subscriber comes in. Since the connection is still active, there is no resubscription which is required. Nevertheless, we don't have anything, any data by default, unless we have, of course, the replay subject. That's now the good thing here. If we are combining the replay subject with the reset on complete, the share doesn't need to reconnect. It is just passing on the data from the replay subject as before. So the only thing that we really want to prevent our share operator is that it is resetting itself when the source is completing. That's the only thing that we need to do right now. And then we end up with, again, only one request for all our components. Let's quickly check if that's true. So I say here, reset on complete. And I say, no, you don't reset, just stay as you are. So we have one request, of course. And then we're opening and we see that the request just stays. There is no new one because the replay subject is serving it and the share operator keeps its state. So how can we do that in our own operator? So again, I say, well, this is the my share operator. TypeScript already is telling me, look, you don't have a reset on complete configuration value there. That's what we are going to change right now. So I say, I have here a reset on complete, which is a Boolean. And now the question is, what should we do with this information, or where can we catch a completion of the source? Well, we can catch the completion of the source in the subscription itself. We have here the next parameter, but we can, of course, also add another one, which is the complete. We say, as soon as the source is completing, we are just calling a function which is called handle reset on complete. So I'm just creating that function right now. Handle reset on complete. It's called here handle reset on complete. And what that one is doing is that it says, well, if I need to check if you really want to reset on complete, if that's the case, then please reset everything. Of course, I need to create a function which is called reset. I'm just writing it down for now. So I say, please reset. I think I have imported something strange. Yes, no requirement for the fake async zone or whatever that was. The reset, yeah, we need to do 3 steps in order to reset the whole thing. First of all, we need to set the connectable or the connected false. So next time a new subscriber comes in and we have this handle initial, then that function knows, okay, there is no connection, I need to restart one. The other thing is that we need to also reset our connector. So in this case, our replay subject. How can I do that? Well, I have already the connector there. I also have access to the factory function. It's the connector. Last thing, maybe I also want to do an unsubscription if that's really required. Let me quickly check. So we have here our source, and I'm storing the subscription here somewhere, maybe not here, maybe to the outside, so that the subscription is also accessible. Subscription so here. And I say, please subscription unsubscribe. That's it. It's in place. So the complete is dealt with as soon as it occurs. And now we can check if the my share behaves in the correct way. I am just resetting it to true. So I'm just trying it now if the default case works. So I say when the HTTP client is sending a complete, I want to have another HTTP request if a further subscriber comes in. And that's what's happening right now. So every time the expansion panel or the holidays detail component, to be precise, is initialized, it is calling the holiday service again. I think I have forgotten to show you that we have here this holiday detail component. In case you're wondering who else is using the holiday service, that's the detail component. And you see here that is requesting the holidays service. And inside of our HTML, of course, we have here the async pipe. So this is where the third or the other subscriptions come from. Okay. And now, as we see that the reset on complete true works, let's check the opposite. Let's check if it also works with false. A reminder, what I would expect now is that I only have one request, but still all my detail components will receive the data. Well, and it's working. And then the last thing that we want to implement, and for that, I'm going back to my holiday component, where I'm having the subscription to the holidays. And let's say the component, so inside of my component, I say, well, I just need to have the holidays one time. I can already unsubscribe if I have my first value. No need to keep the subscription alive. And the way how we can do this, one of the many ways, is that we are using a first operator. This means as soon as I'm getting my value for the first time, I am doing an unsubscribe. Let's see if this changes something in our behavior. I'm again using now the real share operator. So what do we have? Well, looks good. The data is there. We have just one data. So far, so good. But now we have again all the requests. The strange thing is, as you can see, what we had before, it was incrementing every time I am opened a holidays detail component. Now it looks like it is only calling it once, and then every other component is having the data. So what's happening here? Just again, 2, and then yeah, everything looks fine. What we have here, or what our first is doing, is doing an unsubscription. Of course, just explained that before. And the point now is, how does a share operator deal with unsubscription? The share operator is aware of all its subscribers, and it also knows if a subscriber is unsubscribing. Now, what the share operator is doing is that it is counting all its subscribers, and when that count goes down to value 0, so if there is no subscriber anymore, then by default the share operator also resets. And if it resets, we know, we have already seen what that means. If subscriber 3 comes too late, the connection is again restarted, resubscribed, and we have a second subscription in that place. And this also explains now why we only have 2 requests and not a request per holidays detail component here. Because the holidays detail component, they are not using the first operator, so they are never unsubscribing anymore, and that's why the share operator stays alive. That's the reason. If I would add the first operator to the details component as well, then we would, of course, also have these higher numbers in our counter. Now let's change that. So in our connector, we have the possibility, of course, that I say, well, it's called reset on ref count 0, which means if I don't have any subscribers, what should I do? I reset by default. And here again, we say, no, you don't reset, just stay alive. A third one will come later. Okay, that's it. So we see still one request, and the holidays detail also get their data. So this is what we want in our case here. And now the question is again, how can we re-implement this in our own my share operator? So again, I say this is my share. I'm opening it. The configuration needs to be extended, and we say reset on ref count 0, which is a Boolean. What we will need is, of course, a counter. So that's easy. We just say, well, we have a ref count that starts with 0. Every time somebody is subscribing, we want to increment that counter. How do we know when somebody is subscribing? Well, we had this already in the beginning. We know whenever this function is called, a new subscription has just taken place. So the place where I need to increment my ref count is exactly here. Now, what should I do, or how do I know that somebody is unsubscribing? And for that, RxJS provides the observable with the possibility of a tear down function, because what I can do here, that this function, that one, it can return another function which is executed when an unsubscription takes place. And this is exactly what we want. So I say, well, I am just returning another function. And what that function should do, first of all, that we need to decrement the ref count, and then we need to handle a potential reset. And for that, I create just a new further function, which I call handle a reset on ref count 0, same name. And in my tear down function, I just call that one. I say, please handle a potential ref count 0. And what that function needs to do now is, first of all, we need to check if a reset is actually desired. So if we want to do this, if the configuration is set to true. And the second criteria is that we need to check if the ref count is 0, because only then do we have to make the reset. Okay. So here we start with the condition. We say inside of our config, we say, do you really want to reset actually? And what also must be true is that the ref count must be 0. Only if that's the case, reset. Let's check if this also really works. Again, as before, I am trying out the opposite or the default case. So I say here true, reset on ref count 0. There we are. And we see there is the additional request and it stays with number 2. Okay, so the default way works. Now let's check again the opposite. Already how the game goes. We set it to false. And no further requests, as the share operator is doing as well. So now we have also implemented what should happen if all our components unsubscribe, if the source is emitting a complete event, and also if we want to modify our connector, our subject that we want to use internally, we are providing here a connector function so that our components can define that on their own. There is one last thing, and this is something that I don't want to implement because I think by now you know already how this works. I hope you have seen that it's not really so complicated. Maybe it takes a while to get the head around, but in the end, it's not so hard, which actually speaks for the quality of the framework. If you can implement these things in a very easy and understandable way, that's just a quality sign for RxJS itself. One last thing, and this is the reset on error, and we set that to false. So this means if the source is triggering or is emitting an error, then we are doing a reset. We are not doing a reset because I have just disabled that. What I will do now is that I will simulate such an error. So what I say, I have a variable which is called first run. I set that to true. And in my tab operator, I'm doing a check. So I say if this is the first run, if that's the case, then I immediately set it to false and throw an error. Something happened. Remember, we are not resetting. The share operator stays alive even if an error occurs. If we go back, we see exactly that. An error has occurred, so no data is ready. What is now possible that our subscribers, they can define what should happen in the case that an error happens. So the holidays detail, the holidays component itself, it could say, if there is an error, I want to retry. Please restart the subscription and just check if the data is not ready right now. So maybe it was just a small network outage or whatever. Retry also has a configuration, and there I can say I want to delay the retry for, let's say, 2.5 seconds. It means if it fails, we wait 2.5 seconds and then we retry it again. Loading the data. Nothing really happens. And that's the problem. Because the share operator stays the same, so it does not reconnect to the source and is requesting again another HTTP request. So what we would have to do in this use case, in this special use case, that we say, actually we want to reset in case of an error because the holidays component wants to do a retry. And we see the retry took place. So when the error has occurred, the observable resetted and it waited for another subscription. The holidays component said, please retry now after 2.5 seconds. And that what actually And that's what actually happened. So what we have done right now is that we have re-implemented more or less the share operator. And what you see here are all configuration properties that are available. They are a little bit different. You could also just not pass a Boolean. You could also pass an observable here so that maybe you want to delay the resetting. But from the principles, the share operator is just doing more or less the same thing that we have done right now. Actually, the good thing is you can also open it and take a look at the source code itself. And if you have if you study the my share operator itself, you see that there are many things quite in common. So it's not so hard to understand the original share operator itself. Here we have the ref count, for example. It's not so many lines. Most of the code that we see here is actually the documentation, which is also something very good, makes it better readable. But yeah, that's it more or less. So I hope that with the implementation and with going through all the configurations value, that you have now a better understanding and know when to use which value and also what the effects of that will be. And by that, I am done. Manfred, are you here or am I already disconnected from the internet?
No worries, I'm here. I was just looking for the right button here, but now I found it. Yeah, awesome, Rainer. Awesome. Thanks for this cool session. I've already seen it in German, but I'm still impressed.
Thank you.
So don't forget to post your questions into our chat. And before we go on with answering the questions, I'd like to talk a bit about our great sponsors. So just give me 1 or 2 seconds. Yeah, here we go. So, without sponsors, things like this would not be possible, especially after the pandemic when we will meet again in person and if we want to have some pizza, drinks and snacks. So a big thanks to our sponsors. For instance, there is Netconomy, that is a gold sponsor. Netconomy is a great company in Graz and they are always looking for talent. So if you are searching for a job, talk with them. And the same is true for Arena Tech. They are also here in Styria and they are also doing great stuff with Angular. And for sure, they are always looking for talent. Also, this company, I haven't seen it before, just kidding. It's our company, Angular Architects. We are doing Angular workshops and consultancy about a lot of advanced topics regarding Angular. Saying this, there are 3 workshops coming up in the next weeks and months, and you can already book your tickets for them. There is the Angular Architecture workshop. Also, RxJS is a huge topic there, but also other things like micro frontends and NX monorepos and so on. Oh, just give me a second. So, then we have the Angular testing workshop. It's done by Rainer, who is really a pro when it comes to Angular testing. And there is an Angular security workshop. So if you're interested, check out our website and book your ticket there. Besides this, perhaps you want to sponsor our meetup. And in this case, just reach out to me. And perhaps you also want to do a talk or just do a talk without sponsoring, then also reach out to me. We are always happy to share the stage with you and to listen to your ideas and sessions. And that's it. I think now we can switch back to the questions we have here.
Yes.
Some people ask questions about your session. And the first question is, I think it was mainly about the new share operator. Why was this change made and does it improve the footprint?
Possibly, I don't know about the footprint, but what I definitely know is that Ben Lesh was not very happy with the way people use the other multicast operators. He said sometimes it is a little bit confusing, and as far as I understood him, he now hopes that with this configuration addition in the share operator, that it is now much clearer how to use multicasting in RxJS in general. So if I had to nail it, if I have to nail it down to one sentence about confusion about all the different multicast operators, that was the main reason.
Awesome, cool. So the next question is something I'm not totally sure about. Perhaps it rings a bell for you, Rainer.
Yes,
Why
yes.
only next notifications is emitted?
Yes, so I think that this is related to the way how I implemented the my share, because I have just called the next in my own observable. But what you should, of course, do, and what the share operator is doing, that it is, of course, also putting on the arrow and the complete. So this was just for demonstration purposes, just we want to have a minimal prototype. I actually have prepared something. If I can quickly share my screen, just
totally.
1 second. You see here that this is the original source code, and that's the way how Ben Lesh or whatever that has implemented is doing the subscription to the other subscribers. He is, of course, containing everything. So the next, the complete, and the arrow, of course.
Awesome. So the next question is from Michael. Can we also add other kinds of subjects? Also, if the connector is not set, but reset configs are, will it affect the share behavior as well?
You have to ask yourself what will happen when you have a subject in there and you're resetting the connection. I mean, you have seen it, what will happen if somebody comes too late and you have a subject, then it will not work. Other than that, well, I mean, the replay subject is just there that if somebody comes too late, that latecomer also gets the data. Other than that, the reset configurations, they work the same way. And for the first part of your question, of course, you can add everything that you want. You can use a behavior subject. You can actually also implement your own subject if you want. Everything is possible as long as it has a type subject able. That's the type that the configuration wants, or that the connector factory method wants.
Awesome, cool, thank you. Yeah, people are really happy. It was fantastic. Is here one comment.
Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm not afraid of observables anymore. Yeah.
Yeah,
job,
I hope so. I hope so.
Super great talk. I've been using observables for years, but learned a huge amount in the past hour. Yeah, that's really cool. So there are a lot of further comments that tell us that they really liked your presentation. A lot of applause, which is really cool. Yeah, someone was asking, will there not be virtual sessions anymore? I guess also after the pandemic, we will do both. Very likely we will do English sessions in a remote way like today, and perhaps some German sessions on site in a nice huddle room in Graz where we can have some snacks and drinks and so on. Okay, if reset on complete and reset on ref count 0 is set to false, it will lead to an always cached response. Wouldn't this cause some issues, or how to identify the right use case for this?
Well, I think the first step, and this is something that you have already proven, that you understand what these configuration values are doing, because in fact it is a real full cache. Of course, you will also have to deal a little bit with the error handling, but let's put that aside. It depends. I mean, you know what your share operator is doing, how it will behave, and then you have to decide what the use case is all about. So if you say, yes, this is exactly what you need, then you just use it. Otherwise, of course, you can use another configuration.
Awesome. Yeah, and other people are also giving you a lot of applause, and so do I. So thanks, Rainer. Awesome talk. And I would say, let's go on with the next speaker. The next speaker is Duncan. And Duncan will talk about Angular material. And for this, Duncan, can you share your screen?
Yes.
On the bottom, you have this share icon next to camera and cam. Awesome. So here we have your screen. And yeah, Duncan, stage is yours. Enjoy.
Thank you very much, Manfred. I'll just get my speaker notes up. Right. Okay, well, welcome to my talk on Angular material. In this presentation, we're going to look at the Angular material, in particular the Angular material form field component, and what it can do in general, and what it can do for other components as well. So, just a little bit about me, really. Software developer for about sort of 20 years or so now. Sort of started back in the days with VB6 and VB.NET, and moved over to sort of MVC and things like that. But then recently, sort of about 5 years ago, I sort of switched to Angular, and I have to say I absolutely love it. And I also sort of started contributing to some OSS projects and writing about Angular related materials and Angular Flexbox, Angular Flex layout, sorry, as well. I'm also the co-organizer of an Angular community meetup here in the UK. Right, so in this presentation, this is what we're going to, some of the areas we're going to have a look at. Find out what is a form field component, what components the form field supports, and the styling of a form field component using the appearance options, adding some floating labels, adding a required marker, and then setting these appearance options, setting the appearance options, the floating label and the required marker, but setting it globally, because sometimes it won't be always convenient to do that on every component. And then adding a prefix and suffix to a component, adding hint labels, adding error messages, and we'll finish off with looking at setting the themes as well. So the mapped form field component from Angular material, we can wrap both native and Angular material components like input, text area, select, mat select, a chip list, to name a few. And there are some components that don't work with the material form field, and we'll have a look at a few of them in a moment. So what does a mapped form field component do? Especially when it's wrapped around another component itself. So the mapped form field really applies common text field styles like a floating label, hints, errors, and we'll take a look at each of these. But let's just have a look at an example first. So here we have it's just a material card with the material content, and then we have this mapped form field tag on the page, and that's wrapping an input placeholder, an input control, and to get the HTML input element to work with the map form field, we need to add the mat input directive, so that it allows the mat form field to interact with and style the input itself. So what does that sort of look like? So for the moment, we'll just sort of concentrate on sort of using inputs, but we can do other components as well. So using a simple example here from the previous slide, we get the default appearance of a map form field, and this appearance is called legacy. This format shows components with an underline, and when the data is entered, the placeholder, in this case, the name is the placeholder, and that becomes a floating label. And we'll talk more a bit about floating and what floating labels are at the moment in a bit. what components are supported? There are a number of components that are supported by a mat form field input, which we've just sort of seen an example of. But it also includes text area, as the native select, HTML select, a mat select, a mat chip list, and a mat label, a mat suffix, a mat prefix, and a mat hint. But there are also some file type, some types that the mat form field won't sort of play nicely with, and that's file, button, checkbox, date and time, hidden field, image, radio, range, reset, and submit. So there's a few there that it sort of doesn't work with. But in general, it's considered best practice to wrap some of the ones that do work within a mat form field. So let's take a bit more of a deeper dive into some of these. Text area select, mat select, chipped. Right. So we'll have a look at the appearance options. The mat form field supports 4 appearance properties, and these are legacy, and this is the default style and displays an underline. We have standard, and that's a slightly updated version of legacy with a more consistent fill and outline. And then we have fill itself, which just displays a background with an underline in it. And then we have outline, which has just a border all the way around the outside of it. Legacy and standard do look very similar, and the legacy is the original one, and probably should be not used in the sense, and preferred to sort of use standard or fill or outline. All 4 appearances support a placeholder, but legacy is the only one that promotes the placeholder to a floating label. As seen in this example, that's probably not particularly clear. The floating label, once you click into the text box, the floating the placeholder then becomes the floating label, which sits at the top. So you can just about make that out at the top there where it says legacy. Standard, fill, and outline all require a mat label to be placed above an input, and a placeholder on a mat on the standard, fill, and outline will never be promoted to a floating label. So here we can sort of see in a bit more detail so this is the default one. This is legacy. So we set the appearance on the mat form field, and we can set that to legacy, and obviously we've got the mat input. If there's also a mat label also present, and we'll go into the mat labels in a minute, then the placeholder remains as the placeholder, and the mat label then becomes a floating label. But as I said, we'll cover that in a minute. Standard, this is a slightly, as I said before, this is a slightly updated version of legacy, where the spacing is more consistent with fill and outline. And to get a floating label, a mat label is required. With this appearance, the placeholder will not be promoted to floating label. So here we have a mat form field with the appearance set to standard. And in this case, we've introduced a mat label, and we've still got the input type there, and we've got the mat input. So it's the directive on the input there. And I have got some examples, code examples of all these, which we'll go through in a bit. Fill displays the background with an underline, and to get a floating label, we need the mat label again. And the same goes for outline as well. So the appearance set to outline, add the mat label, and then add the mat input directive to the input type. And the mat label will then be promoted to the floating label. So, talked a bit about floating. Mentioned a bit about floating labels and stuff. So, the floating label also has a number of options. And in legacy mode, when setting the floating label equal to always, the float label is always present, even before selecting the input. So, and then setting this to auto will restore it to the default behavior. And then setting this to never does exactly what it says, and the label will not be the placeholder will not be promoted to a floating label. In standard fill and outline, when setting the float label to always, the float label will always be the label will always be floating, even before selecting the input. And setting this to auto will also restore that default behavior, where when you click into the text box, then the label will then move up to be the floating label. For standard fill and outline, setting it to never will not have any effect on it. Never was only supported for legacy and disabled for standard fill and outline. It was originally to be used for the floating label to emulate the behavior of standard input placeholder, but now the form field supports floating labels and placeholders. So on the map form field, we have set the floating label, and for each map form field, like in this example, to always. So on the map form field, I've removed the appearance property for the moment, so we've just got the float label, and we've set that to always. So the mat label will always be floating, even before you've selected the input itself. So we come on to the appearance options, and we have the required marker. Sometimes we need the required field, but we may have another way of sort of visually marking that field as required without using we want to hide the little asterisk that we get in the text box. So we want to be able to hide that, so we can use the hide required marker input property by setting this to true. So that will then just remove the little asterisk there. Setting these properties manually is okay if you've only got one or two fields, but it doesn't scale particularly well when the application has many map form field components to manage. And there is an easier way to set these, and that's to set them globally. To set them globally, we add the appearance of floating labels and a required marker can all be set globally by providing a value for the mat form field default options variable. And to make these globally, add these to the app root. But these could also apply to a particular components provider as well. So it doesn't have to be the app component module. And then this means really we can set these up, the appearance, the floating label, and the required marker once right through the entire application. So if we do want to change the way that text boxes or components look within the app, we can just change it in one place. So for instance, here we've got the options object, and we've set the appearance to outline. But if we wanted to change that application all the way through to be fill, then we can just do it all in the one place, and that will make its way right through the application, and maintaining it a lot easier. Moving on to prefix and suffix, and we're setting text. We can do text, and we can do images as well. The custom content will be replaced in visual containers that wrap the control, And as I said, this can be text or images. It's not recommended to use fill. It's not recommended to use text on fill and outline appearances because the labels on the input do not have the same alignment and therefore are impossible to align. So it looks a bit odd, as we can see in that bottom example there. We've got prefix and suffix, but fill, which is the placeholder, is sort of a slightly out of line, and it looks a bit odd. So it's best for when we're using fill and outline is to actually use images if we want to use placeholder. We want to set a prefix or suffix. So actually setting prefixes and suffixes is quite easy, really. We can just add a span after the input, and then we can just add the mat prefix or mat suffix directive to the span, and then we can add the text, and that will either go before or after the label itself. So really quite simple to do. And for setting images on here, we've got an example here of using an image on the suffix, and we add the mat suffix directive to the button tag, and then the button is placed in the visual containers that wrap the control. This example has the type of either text or password, depending on the value to hide the variable, and we're changing it on the click event to either show or hide the password. So we've seen these sort of icons, these icons here that we can toggle the password with, and this is just how we're doing it. So we've got we're setting the type to be either hide, setting the type to either be password or text, and we're using a variable on hide. So we're setting that hide equals not hide on the click event, so it toggles it, and then we're toggling the visibility icon to be either on or off in the mat icon there. And we can also set prefixes and suffixes, not just with inputs there. So we can do it with selects, mat selects as well. We've got a mat select in this particular option. And again, we can Sorry, I'm just looking at my code, and I think I'm missing the actual bit there that sets the icon on it, but I'll come back to that. I've got some code there that will be showing us how to do that. So a hint message is a message that appears underneath the input component. And as the name suggests, it provides a hint to the user about the information required for the selected field. And there's two ways to set a hint message on a component. Firstly, we can add the hint label to the mat form field itself, or using the mat hint tag, which we can set underneath the input itself. Okay. My examples are complete this time. Yes. So here we have the mat form field, and then we can set the hint label, and then that will appear underneath the text box. The outline, the mat label itself, still appears to be the floating label and the placeholder. But using the hint label option here, the label can only be left aligned. So it's there, but it's limited if you want it to be anything other than left aligned. Here we have the mat hint tag, and that gives us a bit more flexibility. We can actually set the position of that, so we can have it left aligned or we can have it right aligned. So here we have the mat hint tag at the bottom, and this is a mat hint message. And and we can set it with the align property, and the values are either start or end. Good example of a hint message here, and that's a character count. If you have a maximum number of characters, sometimes it's a good way to inform the users on how many characters you've got left to be entered. And we can set a template variable on the input, and this is the variable that starts with the hash or the pound sign, and then in the mat hint we just use that template variable to obtain the length if we've entered any characters, or we set it to 0 if not. So in this case, so it's 0 before we've entered anything, and then as soon as we start entering some characters, the count starts to go up because of the length increases. So we're coming up to error messages. So we can now also display error messages. And some of these can be quite complex, especially when you have more than one validation on a particular input. Angular Materials mat error tag makes this a relatively straightforward process to decide on which error to display and displaying the error message itself. So we can check which validator has failed and then display the appropriate message. To get the error message, we have an input, and on this input we've got a form control. I've just used reactive forms in this particular example. So we've got a form control on here, and then I've set the field to be required, and then we've got our mat error tag here, and if the name is invalid, then we display an error message to say that the field is required. So yeah, I've just added the form control and set the form control to have a validators required, and we've also imported the forms module and the reactive forms module in this case. And on to theming. So when first of installing Angular, one of the install questions is to select one of the 4 stock themes or to create a custom theme. These themes then set up the primary, the accent, and the worn colors, color palettes. And these examples we've been using here in this in these slides and stuff has been the sort of the purple green theme, whereas the purple is the primary color, the accent is the green, and obviously worn is always in red. You can change the colors by creating a custom theme. Have a look at some of how to change some of the actual colors itself using the built-in themes. So the parts we can change really where the underline is on the text box. We can change that, or that can be either primary, accent, or worn. So we can sort of change the colors if we need to. And if we want to change from the default colors, then we need to create a sort of a custom theme as well. But as I said, the four default themes are the deep purple, the indigo and pink, and the pink, blue, grey, and the purple and green. So it just gives us an example here of changing the themes. So we have the default theme on this particular top of the other one at the top here. So we've just got an appearance of legacy. And with that, so the top one then becomes, so it's purple as our default theme. But if we want to set that to a different color, so we wanted to set the color to accent, then the floating label, the cursor and the underline there then takes the color of whatever the accent color is set to. And likewise, if we wanted to set that to worn, we can also set that to worn as well. And it's also possible to change it's also possible to change the color of the required markers as well. the required marker has some CSS properties that we can change, so we can change them as well. So that's the slides done with. I've got an example application sort of showing some of these, which I will just drag it in. Which I should have somewhere.
Awesome. So thanks for this.
Yeah, I've just got an example application. So I'm just trying to. Oh, there we go. So I'm just going to drag that in just to. Oh, if I can. Don't seem to be getting hold of. Right, hang on. Let's just try that. There. So we can just sort of see some of these examples in sort of place. So I've got the legacy, fill, and standard and outline text boxes here. So when I click in them, we can sort of see that the floating labels and all sort of appear. And if I set it to always, then they all become floating labels even before selecting them. And obviously never, we can set that. So that never, on legacy, that never becomes a floating label, whereas on outline, fill, and standard doesn't seem to, it has no effect at all on them. Setting these globally appearances, so the styling, so the appearance, the floating label, and the required marker is all set in code, and I can sort of quickly just show that as well. So here we have the options set up and in our app module file, and we have these mat form field default options, and then we're passing using the spread operator here just to pass the values into the use value on that. And then setting some of the prefixes and suffixes, so we can append label there, labels, and so we can. So if we've got, we can toggle that there as well. So it just sort of shows how to toggle that with suffix icons and with text. As we can see here, that using text on a fill, it's not particularly great because it doesn't sort of line up very well compared with legacy and stuff. The hint messages we've got, so that's using the hint label, and then we've got a couple there using the hint tag or the mat hyphen tag, and using the character count example we talked about there. So as we're counting the characters, the mat hint is then sort of chipping away, is sort of incrementing up. Another one there which didn't talk too much about is the chip list. We can use the chip list in this as well. So just wanted to add an example, add chips to a mat styling, and we get all the same with all the mat form field wrapped around that as well. And then just error messages. So if we don't enter an error message, if we don't enter a proper email address in this case, then we get the error messages come up. And then just to sort of finally, just to show just some of the different types of theming that we can get. And that's pretty much it for me.
Awesome.
By all means, reach out to me. I will put this up on the project I've got for this. I will put this up on GitLab. On GitHub. So that will be there if anybody wants to have a look at it. Some details on the screen.
So thanks for this, Duncan. We have one question, namely one person is asking, what do you think about wrapping all forms in the app into separate components? For instance, in shared or in forms or something like user form. Is this a good or a bad practice? What would you say?
I would say certainly if the form could be quite complex, then certainly I've certainly done that myself in a number of applications where I would take out if I'm sort of repeating a lot of the sort of the components or whatever, the text boxes and input controls, I would be inclined to take them out and either put them into a separate component, and certainly would do that. But if the whole section can be taken out and maybe created into a library, or especially if you're looking to reuse it as well. So yeah, absolutely. Certainly would take that approach and separate it out, because at the end of the day, we want components that are just displaying data, sort of just presentational components. Yeah, we just want to abstract that away from the main focus of the form.
Awesome. So thanks for this. And here is also a bit applause for you. Michael, for instance, is giving a lot of applause. Also, our Michael gave some applause, and so do I. So big thanks for this.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
With pleasure. The greatest pleasure, and everyone again. Okay, so I would say let's go on with our third speaker. It's really a long meetup today with 3 speakers. The next one is Michael, and Michael has dealt with a really tricky issue several times in the past, namely routing for web components, or to be more precise, routing for micro frontends. It's not a simple topic, but Michael got you covered. So Michael.
Yeah, thank you very much for passing the floor, Manfred. Yes, this is the topic about micro frontends and routing strategies on how to work with different micro apps to integrate them into one shell. My name is Michael, and I have a second last name added since the last time we met in former meetups. So I got this first prefix for my last name, Egger, so like Schwarzenegger, but unfortunately I'm not that strong. But nevertheless, let's continue. First of all, a quick introduction about myself. I'm one of the members of the Angular Architects network, like also Rainer and Manfred, and we try to help people out there and companies to do some Angular trainings, workshops, consultancies, also code reviews and Angular projects as well, of course. And therefore, my full focus is on Angular. And we also do this in public workshops. So if someone of you is interested in getting into the advanced topics, like also some parts that we presented today, then please just reach out and look onto our website. You can also follow me on Twitter and get some of the latest news about the Angular environment and the Angular ecosystem, actually. So if you followed the last meetups, about a half a year ago, I also talked about micro frontends and all the challenges that we face implementing micro frontends. And today, I would like to focus especially on the routing part. We have some very nice APIs today, like Webpack 5 module federation. So thanks to the whole Webpack team and Tobias Koppers, but also big applause to Manfred, who wrote a fantastic library to add the module federation APIs to the Angular world. So today we have really a nice situation, integrating this quite nicely into the Angular world, also having the chance to just generate a new micro frontend configuration with module federation configured directly into NX workspaces. So this works really quite straightforward. There are some nice blog posts out describing on how to work with micro frontends, how to implement them. But still there are some challenges. And one of the, I would say, biggest challenge today is the routing part. Don't be afraid. This does not mean that it's a nightmare or that it is impossible to implement enterprise scale applications that also support a quite mature routing strategy. But it somehow depends on what you would like to achieve. In some cases, the routing strategy can be quite challenging. So one question could be, how do a single micro app react on URL changes? There are, in some scenarios, not only one part of the application responsible of changing the address bar, of changing the URL, but maybe there are several micro frontends trying to do the same, trying to change the one address bar, the content of the one address bar that we have available in our browser. And actually also the browsers do not have those nice APIs that would be compatible with a mature micro frontend routing strategy. So let's dig a little bit deeper into where the challenges are exactly located and maybe also how to solve them, or at least have a quite mature strategy on how to work with different router instances working within one of your browser windows. So first of all, independent versions lead to more than one Angular router. What does this mean? You first have to choose whether you want to support a micro frontend platform that works with one single Angular version, for example. Only Angular is allowed, no React application, no Vue application. Then basically life is quite easy. You can work almost like you would do it with normal built monolith Angular application, with lazy loaded modules and so on. It's almost the same story. But it's getting a little bit more challenging as soon as you want to integrate different Angular versions or different technologies like Angular, React, and Vue into one and the same window object. Then it can be challenging because you do not only have one implementation that does the routing part. You have one router for Angular version 12, maybe another router for Angular version 12.1 and for 12.2, maybe a fourth router for a React application and another one for a Vue application. And all of them would like to try to change the URL in your browser. So let's quickly demonstrate this. Let's turn to the browser. I have prepared micro frontend here, so let's quickly look what it does. I've refreshed my shell application. It's per default showing the home root. And now I could try to navigate to this micro frontend passengers. So this is really a module federation setup, loading a JavaScript bundle from a different origin, running on a different localhost port on my machine. So I click on it, and as we will see, maybe some small latency, and then my micro frontend appears. I have a fully functionable micro frontend here. I can do a search for passengers. Some concrete person names, names of concrete people are shown here. And of course, I can navigate within the micro frontend to the passenger edit screen. So you may ask now, what's the challenge actually? So this is working quite nice. I also have the console visible, no console error shown. So what is the big challenge here? This is an application working with different Angular versions, or at least potentially different Angular versions. So there are actually two bootstrapped applications, the shell application itself, and then the micro frontend passenger here. But now let's look into the details, because if I'm navigating back to the home URL, as you can see, the home segment is shown here. It's maybe a little bit small on your screen because I cannot make the address bar bigger, but only with magnifier maybe. But here's the home segment. And then if I would like to navigate to the passengers, it would use the segment MF for micro frontend minus passengers. So if I click on it, I won't see this segment here in the URL. So maybe I copy this to another bigger notepad screen. So let's quickly look at that. Normally, let's forget about this first. I was on the home screen first, and then I tried to navigate to my micro frontend, doing that. MF passenger. So this is the router link that was connected in the sidebar. Nevertheless, the result that was shown, or it is shown in the browser, is another one. It's actually the one below. So this is the URL that we have seen in the browser. It's the URL passenger search. So basically, what happens here is that the micro frontend itself updates the URL without taking into account which route the shell used before. And this is not that nice, actually, because just imagine we do not only have one shell, but one shell and one micro frontend, but one shell and 7 micro frontends. And let's imagine this is kind of like SharePoint, having different outlets where we can show different content to the user. And maybe 7 micro frontends are shown at the very same time. Then basically, it could be somehow a difficult situation if each and every micro frontend overrides the URL. So let's quickly turn back to the browser. That time we are really showing only the URL of the micro frontend itself. So let's quickly change to my repository of the micro frontend, and now let's use one trick. Let's use one routing strategy. We could provide a custom path location strategy. And the custom path location strategy is implemented that way that it extends the default one, the path location strategy that is normally used by the Angular router. But that time, I'm just providing an empty push state method. So actually, this routing strategy just does not push any new state to the history API. And as this source code is located in my micro frontend code base, actually now we would expect that the URL of the shell stays alive, stays being present in the browser window. So let's switch back. I reload my application to be sure. I'm on the home route again. And now I navigate to the passengers. And what we can see now we have really the URL MF passenger. So the URL of the shell is shown. Let's now figure out whether the routing inside the application, inside the micro frontend is still working. Let's do a search here. And now let's navigate to the edit component. Everything works as intended. But the address bar is not updated anymore. So it works, no error on the console. The URL of the shell is shown, and only the URL of the shell is updated. But of course, if I navigate to edit to the passenger edit screen and refresh my application, then of course, it would not return to the edit screen, but it would return to the default route of the micro frontend, which is the search screen actually. So basically, this could be a compromise. This could work out in some cases, but it's actually not the perfect strategy. Something else I would like to show you. How is the Angular router implemented? And it's not only a thing for the Angular router, but in general in the JavaScript ecosystem. So what I would like to show you now is we could use the history API directly. So directly on the console, use the push state API and just push in some route to the home URL, to the home segment of my application. So what could happen now? Would the router navigate to the home URL and show the home component? Maybe nothing happens. Maybe the URL updates, but no navigation done by the Angular router. So let's just try this out. What will happen now? is that the URL segment is changed to home here, but the Angular router does not recognize this. Why is this the case? Because the Angular router is implemented that way that it somehow believes that it is the owner of the routing strategy. It just writes to the address bar, to the history API and updates the state there, but it never takes the address bar into account to update the current routing state of the router. So the truth for the Angular router is its own state, but not what's actually in the address bar. This is the default behavior. You may ask, why did they implement it that way? Why is not the URL address bar the single source of truth, and the router is focusing also on change events in the address bar? This has a simple reason, because there's no API in our browsers. There is simply no API where we could register a callback logic to get notified when something changes inside the URL. And basically, this is something that it's maybe surprising, but also on the other hand, makes it harder for us to implement a routing solution that can react on actually changes that are visible in the address bar, because each and every micro frontend, they do not know of each other. The micro frontends do not know of each other, and also the micro frontend actually do not know what the shell is actually doing, where the shell is navigating to. And I will show you some possible solutions to this as well. So how to patch maybe the history API to get some additional state. But before we come to this point, I would switch back to my slides to talk about some other aspects and some other topics that are related to the micro frontend routing. As mentioned, other frameworks, other libraries may change the URL as well. This is actually the case in practice, and as we have seen now, we have no clear APIs in the browser on how to get notified when this happens. So basically, different bundles try to change the URL, but at the end, no one knows about this. We can just see this present in the URL, but we have no callback logic to register to. If Angular overrides the URL, respectively route to an unknown route, then actually an error would occur. So Angular is somehow a little bit sensitive related to URL requests to parsers or to root outlets that it does not know about. URL overlapping may also be an issue. There could be a same naming for router segments in one and then another micro frontend that could cause some conflicts. So we should also be aware of this. And what are the possibilities on how to actually find a solution for a mature routing concept? We need to ask us some questions. So one could be, how many apps need to be active in the shell concurrently? As I mentioned, it's a completely different story if only one app is active at one time, or if more than one. So 2 apps, 3 apps, 7 apps. Doesn't matter whether 2 or 10 apps, just matters whether it is only 1 or 2 plus apps actually at the end. Do the apps have their own demand for changing the route? If this is not the case, this is a micro app that does not try to use the routing solution and change the history API, then basically everything is fine, and this is nothing that we need to worry about. Is it necessary to manage more than one route? Is it necessary to show more than one micro frontend? Then if all the micro frontends are using a routing solution, then yes, then we need to manage more than one route. Is deep linking between applications, respectively between the shell and micro apps, is this intended? Should there be a possible way to deep link to a concrete view where the routing segment, the target segment is part of the routing configuration of the micro frontend? And maybe this is also challenging. Are apps allowed to be nested? Is it possible that one shell loads a micro frontend, and the micro frontend then loads another micro frontend into its own application? This then can also be challenging, having nested micro frontend routes at the end. So what are the possible strategies to solve this? We can use in a single version strategy named root outlets. It would look like that. So there's one segment for the shell until that part of the URL. And then here there are other segments that are intended to be used with the micro frontends itself. So a concrete URL for the flights micro frontend, a concrete URL for the passengers frontend. This is a setup like the Angular router would do it per default for named root outlets, and we could look out for a similar approach for a multi-version, multi-framework routing solution as well. What are the challenges at the end here? Named root outlet configurations need to be present from the very beginning on if you are using the default routing strategy in Angular. Otherwise, the router would show an error. So somehow we need to teach the router that different configurations do not belong to a single micro frontend, but maybe to the second or the third micro frontend, and therefore we need the first micro frontend does not need to worry if it doesn't understand a certain request to navigate to a certain path. So we could do this that way. We could even have nested routes. So one for the flight search here, and for the detail page here could be a nested route shown on the detail page for the passenger micro frontend. This could also be possible. But at the end, such a deep linking solution is somehow tricky to implement. And as shown before in the Chrome browser, the push state is not recognized by the Angular router. So how can we deal with different libraries in the same window object? One possible solution, we could implement a custom, we could patch actually the router or implement a custom location strategy like seen before. We can implement a central definition that needs to be respected in each and every micro frontend. If this is possible, so if you can define a certain requirement that your micro frontend needs to fulfill, then this is also quite a manageable solution. But in some cases, this is not possible. In some cases, we cannot define the requirements that each and every micro frontend needs to respect. And for those scenarios, let's switch back to my IDE. I will increment now a patching strategy here. And now let's go back to the Chrome browser. Give it a moment until it fully reloads. And as we can see now, we have some additional console logs, like that a new event listener was added. Actually, two times, so 2 listeners were added. So what's happening here in the patching implementation here? I did some patchings for some browser APIs here. So just a quick demonstration, but we could, for example, and the browser allows this, assign a new function to the push state API here. So the history API could receive a new function, and at the moment this function is just showing us the bundle that actually triggered the push state API, and it logs this out to the console. We will see it afterwards in the browser. Some additional implementations. We could also patch the event listener API and have a hook on how to get notified when a certain callback logic is added as an event listener. So in this case, for example, we would like to look out for the hash change event listener and then collect this method and assign it to a function available in the window object. So what we are trying to actually, the behavior that we try to get here is that we can collect the callback function that a routing solution is trying to add to the pop states API, or also to the hash change API. So if a hash change event dispatched, or if a pop state event is dispatched, then we could get access to that callback function. That basically means this is normally the function that is executed if the user hits the forward and back buttons and changes either the hash segment or the history API at the end. And this can be quite helpful because we can then use this function to do some own navigation. So to trigger a URL change of the router at the end. So how could this work? To switch back, I assigned this method to a helper method here in the window object again. So there's then a method available microapp.math. And now let's look back to our application. I go to the micro frontend passenger here, do my search, navigate inside my micro frontend, and now let's use this simple API here in the window object, micro app nav. And now let's navigate to the home URL. So let's use this console command and let's try to figure out, because what we did before by pushing the state, nothing happened, no navigation happened. But if I hit enter now, as you can see, navigates to the home screen. We can try this out with the micro frontend as well. So does it also navigate to my micro frontend passenger? Let's try it out. MF passenger. At least it was registered, but it did not navigate. Give it another try. Let's navigate back. Okay, I will fix this definitely before I upload you the source code to look into a little closer and to actually examine what I've implemented here. But definitely we can find a solution on how to use the callback methods that a certain routing solution adds to the as an event listener. We can reuse this behavior automatically by just patching the browser APIs to use them to navigate our shell and our micro frontends at the end. So this is quite nice, and we can use this for a more mature routing solution where we could at the end even figure out who was initializing the push state API, who actually tried to push a state to the API. We could easily figure this out by using, that sounds a little bit, I would say cumbersome. Nevertheless, it's a possible way to go. We can use the error stack to get the script that actually tried to initialize the routing action that tried to push a new state to the API. And as soon as we know who actually was the triggering part of that routing event, we know which micro frontend tried to route, and we could then use that information to compose the URL in that way and to have all those necessary callback information to compose a full URL that actually has no conflicts anymore, that shows the shell URL, that shows the micro frontend and URL, and also supports at the end deep linking. So to be honest, this is a solution I'm currently working on. There are still some issues. One is connected to module federation. If we share dependencies, then it's not that easy to figure out which part was the triggering script that tried to change the URL. But at the end, I'm quite optimistic that we can achieve a solution that actually is a plug and play one, where we just need to have an implementation in the shell, and at the end, the whole composition of the URL, including all the URL parts of the shell of all the micro frontends, can work out at the end. So let's quickly show this as well. How could a final result look like? There could be a call to micro frontend passenger search, a call to micro frontend flight edit, for example. And at the end, we could use a URL like this, where we have a composed URL showing the dashboard screen of the shell. And inside this dashboard component, each and every micro frontend has its own reserved placeholder to render certain URLs and to show more than one micro frontend, to show a passenger search, a view of the passenger micro frontend, to show an editing screen for for the flight micro frontend, and maybe to even allow nested micro frontends to be shown within another micro frontend. So in this case, the flight micro frontend could show a passenger micro frontend. And basically, all the things that I showed you up until now are the basic foundation to actually achieve such a mature routing solution that at the end could even work out of the box as a plug and play solution without the need of modifying the detailed routing implementation of each and every micro frontend. And then actually we would have a nice API that works, including deep linking from one micro frontend to another one. So let's finalize this for today. We can, as you have seen, monkey patch the push that API and also the event listeners to actually have some hooks to react on a certain routing behavior on one hand, to get notified when someone tries to push state into the history API. On the other hand, with the event listeners, also have callback functions to trigger navigation in one micro frontend at the end. We can also filter some URLs to avoid collisions of URLs in a certain micro frontend that does not know on how to process a certain segment at the end. So what are the key takeaways? It's very important for you to define your requirements. This is also the thing I was try to highlight in our micro frontend workshops, talking about an infrastructure that we implement for a certain company. So you need to define your requirements. Doesn't mean that you actually need a fully out of the box working router solution. So actually, the things you need to be aware of, you need to know whether you need to support multi-version setup and the multi-tech setup. If this is not the case, it can be quite easy to implement the routing strategy based on the single version approach, only working with Angular and using the default Angular router implementation, and everything works out of the box maybe. Also, you need to know whether you want to show one micro app at one time or more than one micro app. Of course, only showing one micro app is the easier approach. If we need to show more than one micro app, we also need to handle different URLs. And at the end, you need also to know whether deep linking is important for you. Is it just important to navigate to the initial route of your micro frontend, or is it also important to have a deep linking solution where you can directly jump to a certain screen, a nested screen, maybe even showing a nested micro frontend in, for example, our passenger micro frontend that was on the screen before. So at the end, URL changes can be critical for your micro frontend strategy, but they do not necessarily need to be. So if you remember back, the first live coding I showed you today was just this strategy where we avoided that the micro frontend actually pushes something into the history API. And if this is fine for you, then the Angular router still works without updating the URL, and only the URL changes of the shell are taken into account. So basically, most important thing, you need to know your requirements, and then you can work on your routing solution. Maybe in near future, we have a library available that can, based on those learnings from today, on patching the history API, using the event listeners, offers us a clean way to have an out-of-the-box solution. Until that, let's stay in contact. I would be glad, it would be nice to get into contact with all of you. So if you have some remarks, some comments, either post them to the chat, and Manfred will coordinate this and forward the questions to me, or contact me via the contact details shown here on Twitter, via email. And yeah, let's hopefully get a nice solution for the future to have a fully working mature routing solution. So thanks for today, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great. Okay, now you should hear me again. Can you hear me? Yeah. And the other issue is that Michael seems to be stuck somehow. So for some reason, oh, here he is. Great. Michael, can you hear me?
Yeah, no, sorry, I changed my audio settings because I thought it was me. Sorry. Now I can hear you again. Yeah.
Everything is fine. Yeah, pure gold. So thanks, Michael. Especially if you run
Thanks.
into issues like this, and you will very quickly run into issues like this if you go with multi-framework, multi-version micro frontend. So pure gold. The first question is directly from me because I'm also interested in this topic and I'm dealing with this topic. When can we have your library?
Yeah, actually, I'm looking forward offering it, but I ran into one issue with micro frontends, especially with model federation. So actually, the API that use the push state patching works without module federation. But as soon as I share my libraries with module federation, which is an actually valid use case that is frequently used, I have one issue of figuring out the correct bundle origin. I still need to work on this edge case, but actually it's an important one. And then the library could be available. So actually almost everything is solved, but in this case, sharing libraries with module federation, there's still an edge case where it's hard to figure out the correct origin.
I see. Yeah, sounds awesome. Looking forward to it. There are some questions from the audience. Michael, for instance, is asking what happens when you go directly to the remote URL, passenger search. Will it load?
Let's quickly try this out in the current state. So if we enter here, passenger search, let's maybe navigate to the home screen because otherwise we are currently on the passenger search. So give it a moment. So what happens here actually, there's a routing request that the shell tries to use, and the shell does not even know about this URL. So actually it simply cannot work. But with the final solution, this of course could be possible. It would then work that way that we would use the shell part and the micro frontend part. So like this, let's put this separately on the screen. So we could have our independent route for the shell, and at the end, then a second route for the micro frontend passenger. And this then, in our case, could be that route passenger search. So this would then, with the final solution, be available. Yes, not at the moment, but with the patching of the history API, this could be functional. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, Michael has another question. Can the micro frontend, can the MFE, come on, can the MFE navigate relative to the host path for the lazy loaded MFE? So passengers will always remain, but all navigation within the MFE is added to that route path.
So at the end, for this whole solution, for the whole out-of-the-box solution that would work with those browser API patchings, we could find our own semantic composition of how the URL should react. So at the end, I would say it would be a nice approach to orientate on the named router outlet like this. So this is actually the familiar routing composition that the Angular router would also do for named router outlets. So in this case, yes, it would then even be possible to have some relative navigations like that. It's just part of the implementation to actually use relative within the micro frontend from search to edit. This could be implemented, yes, because what's happened afterwards is we would forward any change that occurs in the URL. So then the URL would be the single point of truth. We would forward that URL to the micro frontend, And then as soon as the micro frontend receives it, it could also use relative URLs. Yes.
Nice.
It's not working at the moment because of those edge cases that are not implemented yet, that have some issues. But at the end, this could be functional. Yes. And the most important thing that we could easily separate different routing segments from each other. Yeah.
Cool.
So thanks for the question, Maki. Yeah.
I think that was the answer. Let me look up. Michael had another comment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Michael said, I'm coming from just the Angular side, so I can imagine that we could pass the routes from the micro frontend to the host, and the host rebatches the host routes. I think this is what you mentioned before, isn't it?
Actually, to sum this up, it just depends on which requirements you're allowed to set up. To be honest, in most of my customer settings, people working for companies tell me that they are most likely, in most cases, allowed to place some requirements. So if you are, for example, a vendor providing an application shell, and there are third-party companies who need to add some micro frontend to your shell. Actually, most of the time, it's allowed to place some requirements and to tell the third-party vendor, okay, if you want to add that micro frontend to our shell, then please, you need to respect to implement, for example, this custom path strategy. You need to follow a certain approach on how to communicate between shell and micro frontend. So at the end, it's just up to your requirements. If it's allowed to place some implementations in the micro frontend, then it's the easiest part. If this is not allowed, then we can at least strive for that solution that works automatically. And if you can place the requirements, then yes, of course, you could also use some kind of communication between micro frontend and host to tell the shell at the end to do the navigation for a certain navigation demand that the micro frontend has. This would also be a valid strategy, definitely. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, by the way, a lot of applause from Michael. So he really likes it and he values your efforts. And yeah, so do I. So great job. Thanks for this, Michael.
And thanks, Michael. We are also already in contact in Twitter. We chatted sometimes. So let's stay in contact and hopefully have soon a nice solution. And I will definitely contact you to try it out then. Thanks.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah, that was our today's meetup. So thanks again to our awesome speakers. Thanks to Rainer. Thanks to Michael. Thanks to Duncan. It was really awesome. Have a nice day.
Have a nice evening to all of you. Bye.
Have a nice evening.
Goodbye. Bye.
Bye-bye.